Hi, my name is Sarah. 3 days ago, I walked into a boardroom thinking I was attending a strategy meeting. Instead, my brother-in-law took my father's chair and fired me without even looking up. My mother told me I was useless. My sister called me a leech. My father, he said one word, leave. And as I laid my badge down, all I said was, tell the board to get ready. 3 hours from now will be fun. They laughed. They had no idea. I own 82% of the company they just kicked me out of. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this and where? Drop a comment below, because what happened next wasn't revenge. It was justice. Ready to hear what happens when the family you trusted tries to erase you? The parking lot was half full, a few early risers slipping through the side doors, shoulders hunched against the wind. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped out of my car, the worn leather heels of my boots tapping against the concrete like a metronome counting down something I couldn't name yet. Inside the lobby, I gave a small nod to the receptionist, Becca, who had worked here 3 years longer than I had. She didn't nod back. That was the first sign. I scanned the room. No one looked up. A few glanced my way and quickly shifted their eyes to screens or papers. One man, someone from logistics I'd worked with on a crisis last fall, actually stepped backward slightly as I passed. Like I might be contagious. My steps slowed, confusion rising. I wasn't late. I wasn't ever late. And yet the energy, it was off. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe people were just busy. I'd been part of this company for over a decade. Not the face of it. God, no, that was never allowed. I was the shadow, the fixer, the quiet one behind the spreadsheets and the late-night calls. When a shipment was misrouted or an investor got cold feet, I handled it. Always with discretion, always without asking for credit. I climbed the stairs toward the conference room, the one with the long glass wall and the view of the river. The restructuring meeting was set for 9 a.m. per Dad's terse email. No agenda, just be there. Classic him. I opened the door. Lyle was already sitting in Dad's chair. He didn't look at me, didn't even raise his eyes, just held a paper in his hand and began reading like it was any other memo. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. I stood there, blinking. I thought I'd misheard him, but no. He said it again, louder this time, as if I were hard of hearing. You're fired. It didn't register at first. I looked around the table, faces I'd known for years. Some avoided my gaze. Some looked directly at me with practiced indifference. None of them said a word. The door creaked open behind me. Heels clicked across the floor. About time, my mother's voice rang out, sharp as ever. What can a useless thing like you do for this company, anyway? I turned. Her smile was satisfied, almost smug. Next came my sister, Jenna, still dressed like she lived in a catalog. You're just a leech, she said. Get out. I looked at Dad. He was seated at the end of the table, calm as stone. Didn't even meet my eyes. Leave, he said. That's all. There was a beat of silence where I swear the air itself seemed to shift. Behind me, someone whispered. I couldn't catch the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Disgust, dismissal, like I was something shameful they had to scrub out of the room. I had saved this company more times than I could count. Sleepless nights, holidays worked through, contracts fixed just before they unraveled. And none of it mattered, not now, not when they decided I no longer served a purpose. I scanned the faces. Not one of them had ever thanked me for anything. They thought this would break me. It almost did, but I stood still, grounding myself in the silence. My breathing was even. I counted the beats in my chest. 3, 4, 5. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I memorized their faces, the corners of Lyle's mouth twitching, the wrinkle of Dad's brow, Not from concern, but from the mild annoyance of delay. Jenna scrolling her phone like this was taking too long. They had counted on my silence for years. They had built an entire system around the idea that I wouldn't fight back. But they were wrong. I stepped forward, took off the lanyard with my ID badge, the one I never bothered to replace, even when the plastic chipped. I placed it on the table slowly, carefully. Not tossed, not thrown. Just set down, like a stone in still water. Then I looked straight at Lyle, then at my father. "Tell the board to get ready," I said, my voice quiet. 3 hours from now will be interesting. That's when it happened. A flicker, barely visible, but I saw it. Lyle's hand paused. Jenna looked up. Even Dad shifted in his seat. They weren't expecting that. They expected tears, a breakdown, maybe a dramatic exit, but not this, not precision. I turned and walked out. The hallway outside the conference room felt longer than usual. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat. I didn't rush. They thought I was finished. They had no idea. I had been planning for this moment for months. Every lie, every fake smile, every spreadsheet they didn't bother to double-check. I saw everything. I knew where the cracks were, and more importantly, I knew who truly owned what. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt lighter than I had in years. They thought firing me would erase me, but they had no idea what I had already set in motion. I stepped into the late morning air, the glass doors of the building sliding shut behind me with a soft hiss. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring out at the city that had always felt like both refuge and cage. The wind carried a slight chill, but I didn't notice it right away. My mind was still echoing with voices that didn't deserve to take up space in my head. "She's just a leech. You're useless. Leave." Like they'd been waiting years to finally say it out loud. I moved slowly toward the parking garage, heels clicking faintly against the pavement. The sting wasn't just from what they said, it was the ease with which they said it. Like they were reciting something rehearsed, because maybe they had rehearsed it. That thought churned my stomach. As I turned the corner of the building, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I didn't check it right away, I wasn't ready for more yet. But it kept buzzing, a long, persistent vibration that told me this wasn't a message from a friend. This was company protocol. I finally pulled it out. Subject line, termination confirmation, digital file, fine. They had paperwork ready. Of course they did. I tapped the link. It opened a file from HR. But halfway through scanning the first page, I stopped. My title wasn't there. Instead of operations lead, it said supplemental assistant. I scrolled again. They had reassigned every major responsibility I'd overseen. Contract reviews, supply chain coordination, crisis management, to Jenna, my sister. I didn't even know she could log into the vendor dashboard, let alone navigate a deal negotiation. Yet there she was, now listed as the lead on all my accounts. This wasn't just a firing, this was an erasure. They'd rewritten my entire role, quietly, strategically. And they had the nerve to smile in my face this morning like it had just been a tough but necessary decision. I kept walking, trying to breathe past the pressure in my chest. The garage was mostly empty, my car parked in the same spot it had been for the past 9 years. Once I sat inside, I didn't turn the engine on. I just sat there, phone in my hand, staring at the screen, willing the nausea to pass. At the bottom of the file, there was a linked directory. I tapped it. It took me into archived project logs. I blinked, my heart stuttering as I scrolled. My name, gone. Removed from contracts I had personally negotiated, deleted from approval chains, meetings I'd led, now credited to Lyle, financial recoveries I had pulled off during a shipping disaster 2 winters ago, filed under handled by upper management. Every trace of me had been wiped from the last quarter, like I'd never been there. A memory hit me out of nowhere. I was 17, clutching the acceptance letter from the University of Michigan with a full scholarship. I ran into the living room, waving it with a grin. My mother glanced up from her drink and said, "It won't matter. You'll never be the face of this family, Maribel." I thought she was just being cruel. Now I saw it for what it really was, a warning. They had never seen me as part of their legacy, only as a backup, a placeholder, someone to do the work while they collected the glory. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I didn't cry, but I did let the silence stretch. For years, I told myself they'd eventually recognize my value. That if I just kept doing the work, kept fixing what they broke, they'd finally look at me and say, "We couldn't have done it without you," but they never did, because they didn't want to. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, not out of rage, but focus. Clarity. I turned the key, shifted into reverse, and pulled out of the garage. I didn't head home. I wasn't ready to sit in that silence yet. I needed somewhere neutral, somewhere mine. 10 minutes later, I slid into a booth in a small cafe tucked between a cleaner's and a bike shop. The barista gave me a curious look. I wasn't their usual kind of customer, still dressed in business formal, heels clicking on scuffed tile. I ordered a black coffee and pulled out my laptop from my tote. I connected to my personal drive. Click by click, I opened folders I hadn't looked at in months. Contracts, signed approvals, email chains, board correspondence, backups of backups. They thought I was naive, that I'd walked out with nothing but my purse and a bruised ego. But they'd forgotten who had kept this company afloat during 3 major downturns. They forgot who covered their messes while they vacationed in Cabo or played golf with investors. They forgot who saved them when the supply chain collapsed, and they didn't even know what international compliance meant. I hadn't saved those files to cover myself, not at first. I had saved them because I was tired of being gaslit, of being told that wasn't your responsibility, or Jenna was the one who handled that, remember? Even when I had the call logs, the emails, the midnight revisions to prove otherwise, I never planned to use them, until now. I closed the laptop, set my coffee aside, and whispered to myself, 3 hours. That's what I'd said in the boardroom. That's what I meant. 3 hours from now, they would see the cost of pushing the wrong person too far. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it because I had spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at a table that had already decided I didn't belong. I would not beg them to see me. I would show them why they should have. I imagined their faces, Dad's sudden frown, Jenna's eyes darting to Lyle, my mother's forced composure breaking, and I felt nothing, because I had already lost them long ago. And now I was taking back what was mine, not for their approval, but for my own dignity. I thought the worst was over, until I uncovered the wound they left years before. Today, the cafe had started to fill with a late lunch crowd, their low chatter folding over itself in a hum that made my concentration waver. I had been sitting there for nearly an hour. The coffee beside me had gone cold. My laptop screen still showed the folder I had opened earlier. Contracts, records, undeniable proof. I started to close the files when I noticed another folder buried at the bottom of my drive. It wasn't labeled with dates or project names like the others. It was called simply Dad's Requests, Archive. I stared at it for a while. That folder had been untouched for years. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I already knew what was inside, but still I clicked. What opened wasn't what I expected. It wasn't his requests. It was mine. Dozens of draft emails, notes never sent, messages written late at night and abandoned at dawn. One began, "I know you don't say it, but I hope you're proud of me." Another, I stayed late again tonight to fix the transportation error. I didn't want you to worry. And another. I took Jenna's shift today. She forgot again. Please don't blame her. There were so many. Apologies I didn't owe. Updates I was never asked for. Pleas for recognition dressed up as reports. I sat there frozen, reading through a digital paper trail of my own silence. I had spent decades writing to a man who never wrote back. I shut the laptop. My legs carried me out of the cafe before my mind caught up. Outside, the streets of River North buzzed with city life, horns, wind, bits of conversation carried past on the breeze. But I barely registered any of it. I wandered without direction, turning onto side streets I hadn't walked in years. Each corner held some kind of memory. A meeting I once nailed, a late-night phone call I took while pacing, tears held in just long enough to finish the job. There was a brick wall with fading graffiti behind the Thai place on Wells Street. I remembered standing there one winter night, breath visible in the air, waiting for my ride after Jenna had taken the car I reserved, again. That night, Dad told me over the phone, "Just be flexible. Quiet loyalty is the only loyalty that matters." Quiet loyalty. That's what they expected. Not excellence, not honesty, silence. I kept walking until my phone rang in my coat pocket. The sound startled me. Unknown number. I picked up. "Maribel?" A male voice whispered. "It's Aaron, from finance." "Aaron?" He spoke quickly, like he wasn't sure if calling me had been the right move. I didn't know if I should say anything, but they're saying you stole files, that you downloaded confidential data before they let you go. I stopped mid-step. What? They've already told 2 board members. They're spinning it like you had some meltdown and took things out of spite. I couldn't respond right away. My throat felt thick. He kept talking. "I thought you should know. I don't believe it, but they're moving fast. It's ugly." "Thanks," I said quietly. "I appreciate the warning." We hung up. I leaned against the nearest building, a bakery with sweet smells wafting through the cracks of the door. None of it reached me. They weren't just firing me. They were trying to bury me. Before I could even show what I had, they were preloading the story they wanted the board to believe. Unstable, vindictive, bitter. I didn't go back to the cafe. I went home. Back in my condo, the stillness hit different. This time, it wasn't peace. It was grief. A long, heavy grief that sat with me the second I shut the door. I dropped my bag and sank onto the couch. For the first time since they told me to leave, I cried. Not the small, composed tears I usually allowed myself, if at all, but a full unraveling. Deep sobs that left me folded over, arms wrapped around my middle, as if I could hold myself together from the outside. I cried for the girl who worked late every summer break while Jenna traveled, for the woman who always cleaned up after their chaos, for the countless times I swallowed my own voice just to keep the peace. And most of all, I cried because I had still hoped. Even after everything, I had wanted to believe there'd be a day when my father would look at me and say, "I'm proud of you." But that day was never coming. I lay there a while, the room dimming around me. Eventually, I sat up, eyes swollen, chest aching, but lighter. I looked around at the life I had built outside of them. The quiet order of my condo, the clean desk, the framed picture of a team I once led during a crisis year, back when the company still needed me. I thought about what it meant to come to the end of something and what it might mean to begin again. I wasn't broken. I was finished pretending. I walked over to my desk, flipped open the laptop, and began to sort. Folders, screenshots, backups. Not for revenge, but to defend myself, with facts, with integrity, with truth. Because when they stand in front of that board, I will be ready. I will not raise my voice. I will not beg to be seen. I will show them everything they tried to hide. Let the evidence speak for itself. But I didn't know someone had been watching my every move since the moment I left that building. That thought landed like a stone in my chest. Evening had crept in. The city lights shimmered faintly off the windows across the street. I stood in the living room, laptop still open, papers spread out like puzzle pieces waiting for the next move. A twinge of something, instinct maybe, pulled me toward the window. Outside, a black sedan rolled slowly past the curb. It wasn't just the color, it was the way it moved, too deliberate. The windows were too dark for this neighborhood, especially on a street where kids still played hopscotch in the afternoons and elderly neighbors walked dogs after dinner. My block didn't attract mystery. The car didn't stop at first, just glided past, paused briefly at the corner, and then rolled again, only to circle back 5 minutes later. I felt it then. That pressure in my stomach. The kind I used to get as a child, when I heard my mother's heels clicking down the hall, knowing she was about to scold me for something Jenna did. The sedan paused again, this time with its engine idling at the intersection. I stepped back, letting the curtains fall into place. I wasn't being paranoid. Someone was watching. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. I picked it up. Same name as before, Aaron. "Maribel," he whispered before I could speak. "They're moving faster than I thought." I could hear papers shuffling on his end, maybe a door quietly closing. "They're formalizing it now, the story, saying you were emotionally unstable, that you were acting erratic before you left. They're painting you as a risk to company assets." I didn't say anything. My heart had already started to pound. "They're preparing the board packet tonight, framing everything in a way that makes it seem like firing you was damage control." I sat down slowly, gripping the phone tighter. Then he added, "They're using your silence against you." That one sentence cracked something open inside me. Silence had always been the safest path. The quiet daughter, the quiet employee, the one who picked up the messes but never complained. I thought it protected me, but now it was their weapon. When the call ended, I stood for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then I grabbed my coat and keys. I needed to see. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, moving carefully, as if my body already understood what I was about to find. The concrete was cool and echoed with my footsteps. I stayed near the shadows but kept the car in sight. The same black sedan had pulled into the far end, engine still humming. A man stepped out. He was dressed plainly, baseball cap, neutral clothes. But there was nothing casual about the way he moved. He walked around my car, snapped a photo of the license plate, then another of the garage entrance. Then he pulled out a phone and made a call. I was just close enough to catch his words. "Yes, she's home. Send the documents tonight." I ducked behind a pillar, breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just some private investigator. This was coordinated. They were preparing something official. Paperwork, probably false claims. They wanted to box me in before I had a chance to defend myself. They weren't just discrediting me now, they were building a case to erase me completely. I stayed hidden until he left. Back upstairs, I moved on instinct. No panic, just quiet, pulsing focus. Inside the elevator, I stared at my own reflection. Tired eyes, set jaw. There was a younger version of me in there somewhere, still trying to figure out what made me unworthy in their eyes. But she was fading. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew. This was never about me being too quiet, too soft, too behind the scenes. It was about control. And I had something they feared, proof. In my living room, I opened the old storage boxes, notebooks, USB drives, printed copies of contracts. Everything I'd saved, organized not out of strategy, but out of habit. For years, I kept records because I learned early that my word alone wasn't enough. Nobody believed the girl who never fought back. But now, the quiet one had documentation. I started sorting by date, by signature, by transaction. I flagged inconsistencies, marked patterns. There were dozens of agreements I'd managed without credit, negotiations I led behind closed doors, while my sister smiled for press photos. They thought I wouldn't remember, but I kept everything. Each file I opened pulled back another curtain. Their story was unraveling before they could even submit it. When the documents were ready, I began drafting a report to the board. It wasn't dramatic, no accusations, no emotional pleas. Just clean lines, attached files, time-stamped trails. The facts would speak louder than their lies. Because I knew how they operated, loud, brash, charming when it suited them. But the board didn't want charm. They wanted proof. And I had it. They underestimated me. But that was their pattern, not mine. I attached the final files. My fingers hovered over the send button, but I didn't press it yet. I closed the laptop slowly. I needed to breathe first. Then came the knock at the door. It was sharp, measured, like the sound of someone who knew exactly what they wanted and didn't plan to wait long to get it. I opened it without thinking, and there she was, my mother. Not a word. No, hello, no, can I come in? She held a sealed envelope out like it weighed more than her entire pride. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes avoiding mine. I took the envelope, but before I could say anything, she brushed past me and stepped inside like she owned the air in the room. I hadn't seen her in person since the boardroom, not since she stood there and watched me be erased. Now, in my home, she was as cold and controlled as ever. She didn't look around, didn't ask if I was okay, didn't even glance at the mess of files on the kitchen table. She went straight to the arm of the couch and stood like a statue waiting for something ugly to unfold. "You brought this on yourself," she said flatly, motioning to the envelope in my hand. I looked down at it. Her tone, the rehearsed stillness of it, made my skin prickle. I carried it with me into the kitchen, ripped the seal, and pulled out the contents. The paper inside was thick, expensive, formal. It was a statement, a confession, except I hadn't written it. It read like the script of a woman unraveling. It accused me of mishandling company documents, violating protocol, and even making verbal threats. It was ugly, deliberate. And in bold at the bottom, a signature line with my name pre-printed beneath. I stared at it, numb. "She wants you to sign it," my mother said behind me, "so the family doesn't have to take it further." She said she, but we both knew she meant Jenna. The statement had specific phrases, details only my sister would know, words I'd used in private emails, situations twisted just enough to sound dangerous. My stomach turned. This wasn't an overreaction. This was planned. "You were always the weak link," my mother added when I didn't respond. "Your father can't afford to be embarrassed." The words landed hard, but not because they were new. They were just old wounds, reopened. I didn't answer her. I couldn't, not with anything that would matter. She took my silence as permission and moved to the living room. "I'll give you a moment," she said. I sat down at the kitchen table, the envelope still open beside me. The papers spread like an ultimatum. I stared at the bottom of the page, the line, my name, and I shook. Everything in me trembled. Not from anger, not even from fear. It was something else, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering if jumping would finally give me peace. There was a clause buried in the middle, legal phrasing that implied a pattern of long-term emotional instability. I read it twice, then a third time. It was meant to follow me, to every job application, to every board meeting, to every corner of my life where I might rebuild something new. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers pressing into my forehead. I was suffocating. The edges of my identity, the woman I had tried so hard to hold together, felt like they were falling apart piece by piece. And for one terrible moment, I actually considered it. Signing, ending the fight, letting go, disappearing. Maybe, I thought, maybe this is all I deserve. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was the problem all along. My eyes burned. A memory surfaced. I was maybe 7, maybe 8. I had been blamed for something Jenna broke, a vase or a lamp, and I stood there crying, telling them I didn't do it. My father had said, "Don't make this harder, just apologize and move on." And I did, because peace mattered more than truth. I stared at the pen. Then something shifted. A detail, a date, a name. Something in the document didn't align. The timeline in their statement didn't match the records I'd just organized earlier. They claimed I accessed certain files on dates I wasn't even in the building. They didn't bother to make their lies consistent. I blinked. The fog in my chest began to clear. This wasn't just cruel, it was lazy. I stood up slowly, walked back to the living room. My mother looked at me, arms folded, like she expected to see defeat written across my face. Instead, I handed the envelope back. "I'm not signing." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't be foolish, Maribel. You have no idea what's coming." "I think I do," I said, "and you should be careful. Your story is already starting to fall apart." My voice didn't shake. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg her to love me. I just stood there. And for the first time, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not concern, not love, but a hint of uncertainty. That was enough for now. I turned to walk her to the door. But before I could, she stopped in her tracks and looked back at me. Her words came low, cutting. "You think you're strong now, but when this hits you, there won't be anything left to protect you." She said it so casually, as if she were talking about the weather. Then she walked out like she hadn't just lit a match and tossed it into everything I had left standing. I stood there, staring at the closed door, not because I believed her, but because I knew she did. That's what froze me. Not the words. The certainty in her voice. The same certainty she used when she told me I wasn't leadership material at 17, when she said no man would stay with a woman too serious, too difficult, too much. The same certainty that shaped most of my life. And yet somehow it still shocked me. I locked the door, double-locked it, actually. My fingers were trembling, but I managed to slide the deadbolt into place before backing away. The silence in the condo felt thicker now, heavier, like her voice still echoed off the walls, warning me that this time there would be no one left to call if it all collapsed. But she made one mistake. She came too early. They're rushing, and when people rush, they slip. I moved toward the dining table, where my laptop was still open beside stacks of organized folders. I was halfway through sorting the last set of emails when the screen blinked. A pop-up. "Multiple failed password attempts. Security alert. Please verify your credentials." Another followed, and then another. My stomach dropped. I clicked into the security log. 3 login attempts to my company email, 4 to my cloud backup, 2 to the encrypted archive I kept off-site, all within the last 10 minutes. I traced the IP. It was from a familiar location, one I used to sign in from for years, the company headquarters. They weren't just trying to bury me, they were trying to scrub the records before I could use them. I slammed the laptop shut, took a deep breath, and stood still for a moment. The panic was rising, sure, but I could feel something else pushing through it now. Anger, but not wild or flailing. Controlled, directed, cold. I pulled out my external drive, backed up everything. Every email, every timestamp, every scanned contract. I encrypted the folders, triple-labeled them, then placed them in the fireproof lockbox I kept in the closet. The one I used to laugh about owning. Paranoia, I'd told myself. It didn't feel paranoid anymore. It felt necessary. I didn't eat. Didn't even look at the clock. I just worked, organizing, cross-referencing, aligning every file. This wasn't for revenge. I had no interest in taking them down, but they weren't going to take me with them. Sometime around 6:30, I slipped on my coat, tied my scarf tight, and stepped outside. The cold bit at my cheeks as soon as I hit the sidewalk, but I welcomed it. It sobered the edges of my thoughts. Chicago in winter had a way of making you remember you had skin and breath and will. I walked slowly, past buildings I'd known for decades, past restaurants I used to eat lunch at during breaks I never truly took, past the crosswalk where I once stood, waiting for Jenna in the rain, holding her umbrella while she took a call. So many small humiliations, so many silent compromises. If I just stayed quiet, if I just proved I was loyal, maybe they'd see I was good, maybe they'd respect me, maybe they'd love me. But silence never protected me. It only told them I wouldn't fight back. And that's the story they sold, to the board, to their friends, to anyone who'd listen, that I was fragile, unstable, emotional, dangerous, but predictable in my silence. I reached the building on Monroe Street where the board liaison had his office. Neutral territory. He didn't work for my family, didn't owe them anything, just a suit with a file cabinet and a good eye for detail. He opened the door after one knock, mid-50s, glasses sliding down his nose, posture stiff like someone who hated small talk. "Ms. Vega?" "Yes." "Come in." He led me to a small meeting room. I placed the folders on the table and opened the first one to the summary page I had printed the night before. He read the top line, scanned down the second paragraph, and his expression changed. He looked up, face tighter now. "This contradicts everything they've submitted." I said nothing, just waited. He flipped through 2 more pages, then sat back slowly. "They've sent an entire case," he said, "claiming you're unstable, that you mishandled contracts, leaked sensitive documents, even threatened your own family." He paused. "But their paperwork is sloppy. There are inconsistencies in the timestamps. Some of the signatures don't align, and one file," he held it up, "is missing the metadata that would prove its authenticity." I kept my voice steady. "I figured as much." "This is serious," he said. "I know." He looked me in the eye. "You need to be prepared for a formal confrontation." I nodded. "I'm ready." And for the first time, I realized I wasn't lying. He scheduled the board review meeting for the next day, offered me a printed confirmation and instructions for the session. I folded the paper, tucked it into my coat pocket, thanked him, and walked to the door. The streetlights were just flickering on as I stepped outside, traffic humming, wind still sharp against my skin. But I felt something unfamiliar settling in my chest. Not fear, control. I took 2 steps down the sidewalk. Then someone grabbed my arm hard enough to stop me in place. I turned, startled, instinct tightening my shoulders before I even saw her face. It was Elena. My sister's fingers dug into the thick fabric of my coat, her grip more like a claw than a hand. Her eyes looked different, wide, frantic, with that sheen people get when they haven't slept in days, or when their lies are starting to catch up to them. "What are you planning to tell the board?" she hissed. There wasn't a trace of warmth in her voice. No sister, just strategy. Just fear dressed up as rage. I pulled my arm free, but she stepped closer, like we were tethered by something invisible she refused to let go of. "You're going to ruin everything," she whispered. "You always ruin everything." I blinked, not because it hurt, but because of the desperation laced through her voice. It wasn't power, it was panic, and that scared me more than anything. "You've rehearsed this, haven't you?" I asked softly. Her jaw clenched. Her gaze darted to the alley next to the building, and I realized she didn't want witnesses. I moved anyway, my steps slow, controlled, forcing her to follow me into the quieter space where we wouldn't be overheard. As soon as we turned the corner, she dropped the act. "You're fabricating evidence," she snapped. I stopped. That was too specific, too pointed, and it confirmed what I suspected. "You've already told them that, haven't you?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Instead, she muttered, "If you bring up the audits from 2017, you'll be implicating the entire family. Is that what you want?" So they were scared of the records, the financial inconsistencies, the unexplained bonuses, the paper trail I wasn't even going to mention until now. "You know what you're hiding," I said. "You know what I can prove." "That money saved the company." "No," I said. "That money saved your reputation and Dad's." Her mouth twisted, like the truth physically hurt her. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She laughed, not a real laugh, a sharp, bitter thing. "Because Dad promised the company to us, not you. You don't belong in leadership. You never have." There it was. Not about documents, not about ethics, not even about business. Just power, legacy, a house of cards they'd spent years building on sand, and now they were willing to burn it all down just to keep me from standing on the front porch. "You were always the outsider," she spat, "the one who made us look bad, always so quiet, always so morally superior." I could hear her voice start to tremble. "You were never part of this family." That line cut, not because it surprised me, but because it was said with such finality. I stepped back, she followed, fast. "You think you're going to win this?" she said, cornering me between the alley wall and a dumpster. "If you go to that meeting, we will bury you." Her voice didn't rise. It flattened, went cold. Then she pulled out her phone. "I'll show them these." She shoved the screen in front of me. Fake messages, faked threats, a trail of texts supposedly from me, claiming I would destroy the family, my name at the top, my photo, but none of it real. "You think they'll question this?" she said. "People believe what they're afraid to question." She thought she was giving me an out. She thought she was handing me a choice, walk away or be erased. But all she did was hand me proof of how far they were willing to go. And that changed something. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't fierce. She was cornered, not powerful, just desperate. It was the first time I ever saw her for what she really was. A frightened woman wrapped in the trappings of control, terrified of losing the illusion. "You should leave," I said quietly. She blinked. "Before you say something you can't take back." Her confusion cracked through the surface rage. She didn't know how to react to calm, not from me. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just walked past her and kept walking. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I was done begging for a seat at a table they built on betrayal. By the time I stepped out onto the main road again, the sky had darkened. Traffic lights blinked red against the windows of buildings. The wind had picked up, cold enough to sting my cheeks, but it cleared my mind even more. I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't need to. The truth didn't need a script. I walked 5 more blocks until I reached the building. The executive offices were housed in a polished glass tower downtown, just past the river. I had an unofficial meeting set with one of the board members, someone I trusted more than the others. Just enough to hand over what I had, explain what was coming, and give them time to absorb it before tomorrow's formal session. As I pushed open the heavy glass door, the lobby lighting cast sharp reflections across the marble floor. The security guard looked up from the desk. Then he stood. He didn't smile. Instead, he reached for a folded note on the counter and said, "Ma'am, someone left this for you about 10 minutes ago. Said it was urgent." I took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was familiar. It was my father's. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just stared at the envelope in my hand. The thick cream paper, oddly elegant for something that made my stomach drop. It was addressed to me in the same precise block letters he used to label his file folders growing up. Nothing personal, no warmth, just business. I slid it open with my finger. Inside was a single sheet. Maribel, please come to the 34th floor. Now. Everything's being handled. No signature, no context. Just a directive. I glanced at the security guard. He avoided my eyes. Of course. The elevator ride up felt endless. My pulse thumped in my ears, echoing off the brushed steel walls. I knew this wasn't the prep meeting I was promised. Something had changed. When the doors opened, the hallway was dead silent. I stepped out and froze. Every board member was already seated around the long oak conference table. No assistant, no receptionist, just them and me. The lights felt too bright. The air felt too still. Someone near the window muttered, "We need to verify her voting rights immediately." So this was it, not a warm-up, the real thing. I took a deep breath and walked in, my boots somehow louder than usual against the polished floor. At the far end, Mark, my brother-in-law, stood flipping through a folder, acting like he wasn't waiting for this exact moment. My mother was seated next to him, arms crossed, her expression stiff with a righteousness she'd practiced all her life. My sister sat on the opposite side, her face unreadable, but her fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles were nearly white. And my father? He was there too, staring straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes. The board chair, Mr. Bennett, nodded for me to take the empty seat across from him. I did. Before I could say a word, Elena stood up. She held her phone in one hand, a printed transcript in the other. "I think we should begin with this," she said, her voice sweet with poison. "Maribel sent these threatening messages to me, our parents, and Mark. She said she intends to dismantle the family, that she'll go public and ruin the company's reputation unless we hand over control." She passed out copies as if she were distributing a holiday memo. "This behavior," she continued, "proves she's not only unstable, but also dangerous to the integrity of the board." The room murmured. I felt the shift, the tension, the judgment, the unspoken questions already forming. I sat still, let them finish, let them feel the weight of what they just presented. Then I reached into my tote and pulled out a folder of my own. "Those messages are fake," I said, my voice calm and low. "Here's the metadata, and here's the original unaltered conversation." I slid the folder across the table. Mr. Bennett opened it, eyes scanning fast. His brows drew together. These server logs trace the edited messages back to an IP address registered to the residence of... He paused. "Your parents." He looked up slowly. At my mother, then my father. They said nothing. I continued. "The original messages you just saw were doctored screenshots. I've included timestamps, server access records, and screen recordings to verify everything." The room quieted. You could have heard someone shift in their chair. My mother finally spoke, a brittle tone in her voice. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Mr. Bennett raised his hand, silencing her. He turned a page. "This was deliberate," he said. "It's not a misunderstanding, it's coordinated." Elena's face went pale. My father shifted in his seat, finally lifting his gaze, but not to me, to the board. Then Mr. Bennett pulled out another sheet, one I hadn't seen before. "And when," he asked coldly, "were you planning to inform us of the attempt to transfer 7% of company voting shares using Maribel's digital signature?" Silence fell so hard it almost rang. "What?" I whispered. He laid the paper flat. "We received an anonymous tip 3 hours ago. The signature on this form is identical to yours, but came from an outdated encryption key that hasn't been valid since 2019. I couldn't breathe. They hadn't just forged messages. They tried to move assets, in my name. They were planning to make me disappear, on paper, legally, before I ever set foot in this room. I stared at them, my family. These were the people who tucked me into bed, who brought birthday cakes, who told me to stay humble and don't make things harder than they need to be. They weren't afraid of losing the company. They were afraid of losing their grip on the one child who didn't play by their rules. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was awake. Mr. Bennet cleared his throat. Given the severity of the presented evidence, he said, I must ask, Maribel, do you wish to move forward with the motion to strip their board privileges and dissolve their executive authority? I looked at them again. My mother's eyes were locked on mine, blazing, but cracked. My father stared at the table. Elena's hands trembled in her lap. Mark still pretended none of this affected him. I took a slow breath and said, yes, effective immediately. The air shifted again. Papers rustled. Pens clicked. The room began to move, like a machine returning to order. Then, just as the final document was passed toward the chair for stamping, my father stood up. He didn't look at the board, he looked at me. And he said the one sentence that hit deeper than all the lies, all the manipulation, all the betrayal put together. You were never supposed to be more than a placeholder. The words didn't echo. They landed, final, measured, like he'd been rehearsing them for years. I didn't move. My body sat still, but something in me shifted entirely. My father's voice dropped, low and calm. We kept you close because it made things simpler, but you were never supposed to inherit anything. The entire boardroom went still. Chairs creaked, but no one said a word. He added, your mother believed giving you power would divide the family, that it would complicate everything. I looked to her, searching for anything, regret, second-guessing, even hesitation. But her eyes were sharp. She said flatly, because she was never meant for leadership, she was barely meant for this family. That sentence, that damn sentence, meant for this family. It cracked through the last remaining part of me that still hoped they might one day see me, not as a threat or a problem, but as theirs. The board chair said nothing, just watched. My hands were under the table, gripping the edge hard enough to leave marks. But I didn't let my face change. I asked, so all of this, every lie, every scheme, was to make sure I knew where I stood? My mother looked right at me. Yes. No hesitation, no remorse. Something loosened inside me. A knot that had been there since childhood began to slip apart. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just inhaled deeply and said, then you should have never let me touch a contract. Mr. Bennet nodded and stood. This meeting is concluded. The motion is carried. From there, everything happened in quiet efficiency. The legal team moved fast. Documents were retrieved, security codes revoked, assets frozen. My sister and brother-in-law were barred from stepping foot in the building. My parents lost all executive privilege, their access revoked in real time. Someone behind me whispered, this is the biggest shift the board's made in 30 years. Mr. Bennet handed me the signed and stamped documents. This is your company now, he said. Do better with it. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. Across the room, my family stood near the double doors, clumped together, but more alone than ever. Elena muttered under her breath, you'll regret this. I turned toward her. I regret loving people who never wanted me beside them. Her face tightened, but she said nothing. My mother tried once more. If you walk out with those papers, you are no longer my daughter. I looked her in the eye, calm, steady. I think that was true long before today. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She wasn't angry. She was shocked. Shocked that I'd stopped begging. My father didn't say anything else. He didn't look at me, not even once. I turned away and walked down the hallway. each step slower than the last. Not from hesitation, but from the weight of finality. At the far end of the hall, I paused at the large window. This was the spot I used to wait for my dad after school. I'd press my face to the glass, watching the elevators, hoping he'd come out smiling, hoping he'd pat my head, tell me he was proud. He never did. I looked out at the skyline now, older, harder, but finally clear. I whispered, "I did everything right. You just didn't want to see it." I slid the last document into my bag, not as a weapon, not for revenge. It was proof that I survived something designed to break me quietly. The elevator ride down was quiet. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls and almost didn't recognize the calm in my own face. When I stepped outside, the sun was low on the horizon. The wind carried that faint, late afternoon chill, not quite winter, not quite spring. A security guard nodded at me, not out of duty, but respect. And for the first time all day, I let myself exhale, really exhale, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped needing their validation. The company wasn't my revenge. It was my clean exit, my rebirth. I walked slowly, heels clicking against the pavement, passing people who had no idea what just happened on the 34th floor. But I knew I wasn't who they said I was. I didn't need their titles or approval or false love anymore. Healing won't be fast. It never is. Not when the wounds come from people who tucked you in at night and tore you down by morning. But I'm done shrinking, done contorting myself to fit inside the version of me they needed to believe. I whisper, just to myself, "You were never the trash." And this time, I believe it. There is no next chapter, just the one I'll write for myself from here on.